Today, I'm joined by Sandeep Gill, a self-love, dating, and relationship coach and registered social worker with over 15 years of experience supporting high-achieving women through emotional healing, nervous system regulation, and aligned relationship growth. Sandeep helps women come home to themselves so they can stop overgiving, stop shrinking, and finally receive the love that they deeply deserve. Her work is rooted in self-love and designed for women who are ready to break free from unhealthy relationship patterns without abandoning themselves in the process. Her background spans child protection, family counseling, and clinical hospital care, giving her a deep capacity to hold complexity and pain with compassion and clarity. Through her own lived experience and in her work, she found her calling, helping women build lives and relationships that feel as good on the inside as they look on the outside. Her approach isn't about fixing women, it's about guiding them back to their wholeness. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because Sandeep's work speaks directly to women who appear successful on the outside, but know there's more alignment, ease, and emotional freedom waiting for them. Oh, Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So first of all, I just want to say, I was like, I got to get this woman on my podcast because your Instagram, which I will link in the show notes, it was just so inspiring. And, everybody's got this journey, but it's just nice to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think you also posted that 2016 to 2026 trend and things you would say to your younger self. And I just feel like when I see people get over that mountain, it just feels really good to be around that. And so that's why I really wanted to have you on today. Thank you for coming to today's episode of Her Energy Unlocked. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. And honestly, I think we all just need women to be our expanders for each other, be our mirrors for each other. And that's how we all grow, evolve.
So true. But we're also the first generation, I feel, who are being allowed that space or are taking up that space, I should say.
Yeah, I think part of it is we have to give ourselves the permission first before we can try to seek permission outside of ourselves, which is often what we have been conditioned to do.
Oh my God, so much embedded in this patriarchy.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm going to go deep and deep on that. But can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey and what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, so my background, you summarized it so beautifully. I'm from a really small town in British Columbia, the Okanagan. So grew up in a farming rural community where we were quite traditional in our household. Like many people probably listening, household that held many generations of family members together. And there was so much beauty in that as well. But also very little space for authenticity, very little space for curiosity of oneself. And that was from a young age something I was always deeply interested in, but didn't have the space or the tools to know how to navigate that. And then, naturally I went into social work school because we're all taught to be good little helpers.
Yeah.
But then at 22, I went traveling, backpacking for the first time after university. And I was away for 3 months in Europe with my best friend. And that was really the first time I was like, who am I? And it was the first time I felt this inner sense of peace and happiness that was actually from within. And I could just be myself. And I didn't know what being myself meant, but I could be whoever the frick I wanted to be.
Growing up, people would be like, oh, I encourage my kids to travel for the year. And I think that was like so anti-South Asian mentality. And I never aligned with that because I was like, oh, no, you got to be efficient. You got to go to school. You got to go work. You got to make money. And then when I started traveling, once my kids got a little bit older, I finally found that there was space for me to think about me, which had been lost for many years because I, was taking care of the kids. And I lost myself in that. And so that's why, we're down this journey of now rediscovering ourselves because we prioritize, other things versus ourselves. And I don't know if that's preconditioned in the way we're brought up. But what are some of the common ways people lose their sense of self in long-term relationships?
I would say it starts way before you're in a long-term relationship. I think it starts from the time we're born. We as children, we are in survival. Right? It is about survival. So we are always going to choose belonging over any kind of authenticity because that's not the priority. We start to lose ourselves in that kind of way. But then I question, do we ever lose ourselves? I think maybe it can be a momentary thing And then we can always come back to ourselves, which is the beauty of it. I think in relationships, part of what I have seen in my professional experience is we will then mirror the relationships that we've seen around us. And for myself and many of the women that I work with, what we mirrored is our relationships from our mothers, from our aunts, and often they had marriages that were really, the foundation was self-sacrifice. So that becomes a really, really big way in how we shrink ourselves. The self-sacrifice, the putting our worth and value on what we offer, what we do, how good we can be. And then we also, there's a lot of shame. And shame is something that is kind of celebrated in a lot of cultures, especially with a lot of the women I work with. There's that saying, look how much shame she takes. And it's a thing of praise. So again, even as grown adult women in marriages and relationships, we are then prioritizing our sense of belonging and value over ourselves. So we lose our voice, we shrink our needs, everything.
It's interesting on social media. I will see women, highlight their wedding and all of that and be like, oh, look, I wore this lehenga and I did all of this. And I feel like commenting saying, you have not scratched the surface of what this journey of relationship with a partner or a relationship with yourself is, because you're 23 years old and your frontal lobe has not developed yet, girl. And the environment that,
Girl.
right? Like, girl, your biggest stress is putting your name at the banquet hall in the letters. No, 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 no. There's more to come. And I hope that, and that's the point of this podcast, is to equip either women our age or, you're younger than me, or even the next generation of women who are out there dating and looking for partners, thinking about the things and challenges that they'll face and already have that in the back of their minds when they are searching for that sort of love, if they ever want to find it. That's the other question.
Absolutely. And it comes down to the blueprint. So I do a lot of work where I call it relational blueprint work. We have to rewire the blueprint of what it means to be in relationship, what it means to relate to men, if you're in a relationship with a man, right? But we have to rewire all of that blueprint. And I think I grew up seeing not the best of marriages, especially even with my parents. And then I worked in child protection services. And then I worked with a lot of couples in domestic violence. In a way, I only saw the worst of the worst, so to speak. So one day I was like, something has to change. And what can I do to support women before they enter the relationship, before this? And the big foundation is self-love. Yes. But self-love is one aspect of it. And then there's another aspect of it is, again, the relational work.
What does self-love really mean to you when you're describing it to somebody?
What I say self-love is, and this is wholeheartedly from a place of having embodied this myself, is you have to learn how to love the worst unloved parts of yourself. That is self-love to me. And that is not fluffy. That is not the baths and it's not the traveling, as much as we love that. It is being able to sit in the discomfort of what you dislike, even hate, carry shame internalized about yourself. And when we can start to confront those parts of ourselves and essentially make love to all of us, that is self-love. Yeah.
That's so true about the baths. When I see people light a candle and say self-love is sitting in your tub, I'm like, I can't do that. Self-love to me is waking up, walking, exercising, eating clean. There's other things that look like self-love. But I don't want to get into self-love too much because I want to talk about the relationship work that you were talking about. What does that mean?
I was humbled. I'll say that. And I always use myself first as the case study before I do any of this work with clients first. I was previously engaged. I ended that engagement, and that was really the catalyst for me in, hey, who am I now? I was 32. And again, that feeling of having lost myself was very, very real. But again, when you're in a relationship that is not in alignment, we are taught and conditioned for survival, right? So we will do whatever we need to do to survive in the relationship, which is, again, disconnecting from ourselves. So my 4.5 years before I met my now amazing, amazing fiance was on myself. I wasn't interested in dating and being in a relationship at that time. I really wanted to be who am I? And it was a self-discovery journey. And I was like, okay, I love myself. I really do love myself. But when I was starting to date, it wasn't translating. And I'm like, what is happening here? And what I realized is that you can love yourself, but there is still relational work that only can happen with another person. You cannot just do that within yourself.
Give me
So
an example.
again, the relating to, for me, again, relating to men, right? Growing up with a father who was an alcoholic, that carried a lot of wounding for me. And I had done a lot of healing work on myself, but there was still a part of me that was so fearful of relationships. So what did I do? I was unconsciously dating and choosing men who were on some level not going to be available. And for me, that looked like often dating guys who didn't live in the same city as me. Let me make that unavailable as possible so I don't fear the hurt, so I don't get hurt. So let me reject you before you can reject me. That's an example of what I mean relational work. So now I had to do another layer of healing around the relational piece towards men, my own insecurities, my own fears that were coming up. And then when I did get into my relationship, I'm like, this guy is worth me sitting in the discomfort and pain and anxiety that's coming up with all my insecurities, because I was still carrying that with me. And you cannot really do that on your own, only to an extent.
But I feel like we're at a transitional stage where now women are like, well, I'm not going to sacrifice my values. I do see the light there of women who are saying, well, this is what I bring to the table and I want somebody who matches that. I'm not just getting into a relationship to check off a box. I want somebody like not the bare minimum, but somebody who can provide more. And I think that that's a testament of women finding their voices at a younger age with confidence and independence, which I absolutely love. But then there is the other side of it, and that is women who may have, checked off the box and picked the first guy and now are, older in their mid 40s, late, early 50s, and the kids are grown, they're out of the house, and now they're looking around and they see a partner that no longer aligns with them. So what practices can help clients connect their values, desires, and their voice again?
I think one of the most powerful things women can do for themselves is to actually learn how to be with themselves. And when we talk about work within our nervous system, like that's like our motherboard, right? And then somatic work is really just like being in your body and staying in your body. So you're not outsourcing that. You're not trying to run away from yourself. So a simple practice of sitting with yourself every single day, even just 5 minutes, no distractions, no music, just actually breathing into your body and breathing out and noticing what is happening in your body. What sensations are you feeling? What does it feel like to be me right now? And it might sound really simple, but it's actually meant to be that simple and that effective. So that's one practice I would suggest. And then another one I would say for women is, again, if we're talking about coming back to ourselves, building that connection back, right? Is learning what you sound like, hearing your voice. And a practice I teach a lot of my clients is what I call the 5-minute self-talk, where for 5 minutes, it's when you're driving to work, it doesn't matter, and you just give yourself permission to take up space. Give yourself permission to use your voice, to hear your voice. It could be you just talking about how your day went. It could be more intentional, like this is something that's been really hurting me, and I'm going to give myself the space to speak it out loud.
That's pretty powerful. I'm going to add to that because I like to journal, and
Journaling.
I'm a paper and pen girl. I like to write out my thoughts, and why I believe in the power of journaling is it gives you that space of everything that's in my head, right? There's 100% of this brain working. 25% is thinking about the kids. 25% is thinking about other family members, this, that. But when I take that all out and write down my thoughts of what I'm feeling, what went well, what's not going well, what I want to work towards, to paper and pen, it kind of just makes it into a plan for me. I'm an action-oriented person. I don't like to sit in discomfort a lot, and that's really hard for me, but I'm learning to sit with it sometimes. But then I'm also like, okay, now what? Now I didn't feel good about this. How can I now feel better? And I feel also on top of that, the biggest eye-opener for me has been leaving my home to do that, whether I'm sitting at a coffee shop, because I feel like in the house, it's always like mom or phone rings or something. There's always a distraction. For me, physically removing myself from my home is where I get a lot of the breakthroughs of processing the things that are going on in my head and things I want to work on. So, ladies, if you're listening, I love this. Sandeep says if you're driving to work, having that self talk is great. If you just want to go to a coffee shop and just think too, I think there's a lot of value in that. But giving yourself that space and permission to do that is so, so key. And now we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries. And I spoke to somebody else a few weeks ago, and she was talking about boundaries and that boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are kind of like rules of engagement. I kind of like that because I think when people hear boundaries, they just automatically shut down and like, oh, Mandeep's got these boundaries. But it's like, it's not scary. They're just things that I protect myself with. So how can someone set boundaries that protect their peace without feeling guilt? That's the big one. Without feeling guilt.
Okay, I'm going to break your heart a little bit here, okay? I don't think we need to always do everything without guilt. And this is something I have been really, really unraveling within myself because we have now shamed and made guilt wrong, right? So the first breakdown actually I want to go back to is, and if I go off track, just reel me back
No,
in here.
I love this. It's a natural conversation, and that's what I want here.
I think we often will go from one end of the pendulum to the other end of the pendulum when it comes to boundaries, right? And what I actually like to say is now we've gone over here, but this is what makes the wall, right? And we got to sort of make our way back. But how do you know what your boundaries are? That's the first thing. And this is where the values piece actually really comes in. Because if you want to know what your boundaries are, go back to what your values are. Your values are really like that compass, that internal compass that helps you look at why do I do what I do? Why do I make the choices I make, right? So when we look at it that way first, okay, recognize the values. And then from there, it makes us having boundaries a little bit more tangible, a little bit more clear and understanding. And my big thing with everybody I work with is I always get my clients to take their finger and go back to themselves and say, I am responsible for my life. You can say it with me here. I am responsible for my life.
I am responsible for my life.
Once more, I am responsible for my life.
I am responsible for my life.
Now, why do I say that when it comes to boundaries? Because boundaries have nothing to do with the other person. Boundaries is not, this is what I need you to do, because now what we're actually doing is control. And we cannot do that. Boundaries is what am I willing to do? What really matters to me? Hey, I don't like the way we're engaging in this argument right now. If you do not stop raising your voice at me, I'm going to walk away. That's the boundary. It's the I'm going to take this action and separate myself into the next room. It's boundaries is what you're willing to do.
I'm in charge of my own happiness. I think, sometimes when we're in relationships, and I've had many conversations with many wives and friends and girlfriends, and they'll be like, oh, XYZ is like upset. I'm like, let him be upset. Let him sit with that, right? If you're not in charge of, the action, then let that person figure out that. Because I think sometimes we feel that everybody has to be happy all the time, and that's my happiness. Whereas now, I'm going to be approaching 50 in a few years, or I am approaching 50. At the end of the day, everybody will leave me. My children will, hopefully my husband and I, live a long life. But like at the end of the day, everybody will leave me, and I need to be left with myself and be happy with myself and the choices I make, and not sit there like most South Asian women do at the end of their life. What did you do for yourself in your happiness?
Yeah. And what you're really speaking to when you say that is victimhood, right? Where again, we've outsourced our happiness, our power, our life to another person. And why we say I'm responsible for my happiness, I'm responsible for my life, is to bring that onus back to you. And just around that guilt piece that you had asked, the reason I say that, like, we don't need to remove all the guilt because it's not black or white. Sometimes that guilt is also an aspect of, hey, like, this also really matters to me. And I also do care about how this person feels. So we can hold the complexity of two things. I feel this guilt, and I honor this guilt, and I can sit with this guilt. And also, I have to have this boundary in place for my own well-being.
Two truths can exist at the same time. How do you help clients or rebuild the self-trust after ignoring like red flags or compromising themselves?
I think the first thing is compassion. I think when I think about what self-trust is, if we break that down, there's a lot of compassion that is required in self-trust. right? There's a lot of honesty that is required in self-trust. You have to have the capacity to hear yourself, to recognize all the truths that live within you, to have self-trust. And it's knowing that, hey, I'm going to be okay no matter what. I'm going to be okay because I know I can hold myself. So when you have compassion for what you didn't know, or for not having the tools you didn't have, and now we can work on the discipline and the consistency that comes. And it doesn't have to be in big things right away, like it's just the compounding things and actions that we take. That's how we develop self-trust. It's not by reading another book. It's the action that you take that develops the muscle of trust within yourself. Like, hey, I can do hard things. I have a client who went to the gym for the first time, and now she hired a trainer. She's going 3 or 4 times every single week. Now that's building up her confidence and self-trust that, hey, I can do this. And now that there's a domino effect on that, she came to me after she was divorced. And now there's the muscle of, hey, I can also do this. I can start dating again. I can have the love I want. It all compounds when you take action that compounds.
That compound growth. There's an episode I did. It was like 5 ways to level up 2026. And it's so true that building that momentum and self-trust in yourself, it's not easy, but those small little things you do to build that trust is what moves that needle long term and, with the larger goals. So what are small everydays to practice trusting yourself again?
Well, I guess I just mentioned it's give yourself promises that you know that you can keep to yourself. Maybe it's, waking up at a certain time. Maybe it's getting to the gym, eating healthy. Maybe it's an accountability partner that you work with that also supports you and recognizes you. I think that's actually why a lot of women come to me, is they're seen, but then there's an accountability piece that comes with it, that comes with the action. Self-trust requires action. Period. You get to give yourself that.
Why does starting over sometimes may feel so intimidating, especially later on in life for women?
Honestly, I think that's the story that we play in our heads. I think that's the story that society or culture has told us. And I think that's why for some people it feels hard, because we think it's supposed to.
I think sitting, like you mentioned earlier, like sitting with yourself and by yourself, that can be hard, or it may be in your head. But once you do it, it just kind of becomes normal, and being around that peace, maybe.
It's also our nervous system is always going to want what's familiar.
Yeah.
And we can't forget that. Again, that's our motherboard, right? And our nervous system has been our nervous system since the day we were born. And even if you grew up or you were in a relationship, in a marriage for 20 years, and it was very chaotic, that is now your nervous system's equilibrium. And that is what it will always want to come back to. So now when you leave a relationship, yes, you're going to go through the high of, okay, I left finally. But then you might start to question yourself. It might start to not feel safe. But that is also just your nervous system recalibrating as you restart and rebuild your life.
Interesting. Because that could be why then women go back into that toxic relationship back and forth. There's a little back and forth that happens because this is a new way to process everything. What are some relationship patterns that you often see in clients that are repetitive, and how do people break past them?
I think there's a lot of things, One of the suggestions is the stories we tell ourselves based on what society, family, culture say. Okay. The second we're talking about is the nervous system. But it could be many other things. And it could be just circumstantial. It could be the financial aspect, right? It could be there's kids. There's so many layers. But I think what I would want any woman in that situation to know is that it's never too late. And yes, it might be hard, but one day it won't be. One day you will overcome that, and you'll be like, hey, I'm on the other side, and it was so worth the hard because of the woman I got to become, who finally left, who started to rebuild her life. I have a client right now who's in her 50s, divorced after 30 plus years. And right now she's in Europe on her self-discovery pilgrimage, is what she's calling it.
And she's out there discovering herself, a different version of herself. Because sometimes I look at old photos of myself at 25 and go, oh, I wish I had told her XYZ and prepare this way. But I think you have to go through the process of ups and downs. Everybody's got ups and downs and learn from them. And now I stand a little bit more concrete on some of the values maybe I did have at 25 and some of the values that don't align with me anymore.
Yeah.
And that comes with time and experience and reflection. That's where that taking that self-talk is so important because that's a moment of reflection where you can reflect on your thoughts.
I also think that why do we think it's supposed to be easy? Single one of us is going to have some level of hardship of some sort, but that's also what develops our becoming. That's what develops our character, you know? None of us are immune to some level of hard, and hard doesn't mean wrong. It's just part of life. I think if we normalized, things are going to be hard. You're going to go through hardships, but that's also your opportunity to grow and evolve and develop new skill sets and become another version of yourself.
And that's why you're listening to today's episode. I like to grow, right? Because having these conversations is so important. It's so funny. I just had a child therapist on. Go back a couple episodes, Stacey Schaefer, and she talked about being a human is hard. Being a parent is hard. Being a daughter is hard. This is the first time we're doing it. We are in uncharted territory here. The rule book that was probably passed down to us from the generation prior may not be the one that we can now pass down to the next generation or live with contentment ourselves.
And, the whole point is to become like resourced women, right? I think that's the whole point of life.
Be happy with yourself. Be happy with, the energy that you put around you. Okay, here's a question I got from a person who is going through the divorce process herself right now. And I'm trying my best to help her. When I told her you're going to be on my podcast, this is what she wanted to ask. And it's, when do you stop feeling like you let everyone down in the process of when you're filing for divorce or going through the divorce process? When do you stop feeling like you let everybody down?
I think when you decide to, honestly. I don't think it needs to be overly complicated. It's when you can look at yourself in the mirror, look at yourself in the eyes and say, I making this choice that I'm not going to prioritize everybody else's perception of me and what they think I should do. And instead, I'm going to take that power back here. And we are always going to ruffle feathers. Not everybody's going to understand your journey, and they're not meant to. But as long as you do, that's the only journey and person that actually matters.
When you say you let everybody down, are you talking to yourself? Are you in that moment thinking, I let myself down? And take that deeper of how did you let yourself down by being in this for as long as you did, not taking the right action earlier? I've been wronged in life, like everybody has. And I would go to friends and I would explain my situation and they'd be like, oh, you need to forgive that person. And I was like, I'm not forgiving that person. Are you kidding me? Because to me, forgiveness in that moment meant that I let them get away with them treating me that way. And what I learned in therapy is that forgiveness was for myself. I have to forgive myself for allowing that behavior to have happened. And moving forward, the forgiveness is also the accountability that that behavior is not going to be repeated, the lived and learned part of it. I will say to that question, are you forgiving yourself is number one, right? Compassion. So, so true. And then everything else, everybody else. Once you get rid of the Loki kange, once you get rid of that, you're so set free.
And I absolutely, and I think, this goes back to that conditioning of that good girl, right? Again, if we go right back to childhood, where we will always choose that belonging, always choose being praised, all that over ourselves. This is literally what good girl conditioning is. This is how it manifests. I've let everybody down. That's the stories we start to tell ourselves. And it's again, just taking that power back, start honoring ourselves day by day, choice by choice. And those voices or those perceived voices do not get stronger. They get weaker because we're strengthening our own.
How about you being let down by the conditioning of society? I had a chat with somebody in an upcoming episode, and we talked about the rules of relationships we were taught. And it was, everybody watched Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge with Shah Rukh Khan. And that is what we were taught that this is the guy, like, he's gonna leave England to go to India to find you. Like, that was the guy. And that was the relationship advice a whole generation of women grew up on. That was the point of information that we were given, that this, when you're finding a partner, if he just does this, then everything else is so rosy.
That's the
So
blueprint.
that's the blueprint.
That's
Yeah.
the relationship blueprint, right? So there is a whole generation of women that may have grown up with that blueprint of this is what love is supposed to be. This is what it's supposed to feel like. And then we will recreate those same experiences, except for, hey, this isn't what I thought it was supposed to feel like. I don't feel good. I don't feel safe in my body. I'm shrinking.
Where's the other movie that tells the women how to handle that
Well,
part of it?
I think are creating that blueprint now, right? We're saying no, thank you. That actually doesn't really work very well for us. And we are now the living being proof of a new blueprint. And that's the cycles we're breaking and what we are mirroring now to our children. But when I do have children,
Which is so important, because I've had conversations with friends who have daughters, my daughter's age, and we talk about the relationship advice or the dating advice we now want to give them, the tools we want to equip them with. And I'll probably do an episode on its own, because some of them were really eye-opening that I didn't even think of. That conversation you have with other girlfriends or your spouse about how are we raising our daughters to accept love is so important, because if you haven't been mirroring that at home, what they will accept will probably be not what you want for them.
And let's say you are in a relationship, like we are bringing our woundings in our relationships, and we all have them. Those core woundings of not enoughness, they don't just go away, and part of, again, self-love is honoring and owning that we carry these woundings, but having the awareness to them. And now you have your person who's also carrying their woundings. And now as a couple, that's one thing, I feel really proud of in my relationship as well, is how I notice how much I have grown. And I was home for the weekend at my parents' place, and I just, watching their interactions at my mom and dad's, and I'm like, oh my God, no wonder. For a long time, like relationships, like I was fearful because I did not ever want to be in a relationship like my parents. And I just hope when I do have kids, they can look at me and he will be my husband then, and say, I want a relationship like my mom and dad.
I do think men soften also if they haven't been in the environment, and this isn't all the case, but when they have daughters of their own, and then something clicks too, hopefully, that, oh, wait a minute here, I don't want her treated that way. But then how are you treating the mother of that child?
Do I have the awareness? Okay, but do I have the tools to make a different choice, to change my behavior? That's the work.
I've had the experience where people have come to me and they've told me, oh, yeah, we're no longer together. And I never know how to react. I always try my best. And one of the things I say is, hey, I'm sure this was a very difficult decision for you, and I support you on any way I can. But I also am not in that process. But how can I support somebody who is going through that process to be supporting of that person who's going through maybe a separation or a divorce?
I think the best way is just letting them know that, hey, I'm here, and asking them, how do you want to be supported? If it's like, do you want me to just hold space today and just be there for you? Yes. Do you want me to, share my opinion or whatever that looks like? Do you want me to take you to your appointment to a lawyer's office? It's okay to ask, how can I best be of service and support to you?
And if you know somebody who's going through that or needs help with either self-love or with finding themselves, whether they're in a marriage or leaving a marriage, you can share this episode with them. Because I also think when I'm trying to support friends who are going through it, I'm really trying hard not to jump in and rescue and be like, and because everybody's situation is so different. Yeah, like give her a shake and saying, what? It's like, and then sometimes I also want to give that person a hug saying, hey, you're making the right choice for your children. It's going to be tough, but your future you will thank yourself. If someone's listening and is either going through this process and feels lost right now, what is the most important thing you want them to know?
Girl, life is so beautiful and short and long at the same time, and you only have this one life. You only have this one life. It's okay to ruffle some feathers. It's okay to be scared and do it anyways.
It is such a small part of your life if you think about it.
It's one chapter. It doesn't need to be the whole book.
I think that peace that you get at the end of it is probably what I try to tell friends is there's going to be peace at the end of this, and you just got to trust the process to be able to surround yourself with other women who've gone through the process. And so, Sandeep, if anybody wants to reach out to you or connect with you, to work with you one to one, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way is I hang out on the gram, on good old Instagram the most. You can find all my work on there. I have an upcoming event coming on February 15th. It'll be a live online event just to get a feel for what the juju in my work really is. And just send me a DM. Say hey.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's amazing. So, as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to acknowledge how much courage it takes to even ask the question, who am I now after divorce? If there's one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's this. You didn't lose yourself. You adapted to survive. And now you get to choose who you become with intention, compassion, and clarity. Whether you're learning to release anger, rebuilding trust in your own voice, or standing at the edge of starting over, know that this chapter is not a setback. It's an invitation to break cycles, to lead yourself differently, and to create a life and relationships that feel aligned, not performative. And if you're listening as someone who hasn't been through a divorce but loves someone who has, your presence matters. Sometimes the most powerful support isn't advice or fixing, it's patience, belief, and holding space without judgment. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with somebody who might need it. And if you want more conversation on emotional health, healing, and real connection, make sure to follow me on TikTok or Instagram at Her Energy Unlocked Podcast. Until next time, remember, your energy is yours to reclaim, your story is yours to rewrite, and your next chapter is waiting. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.